Imagine for a moment that everything you thought you knew about the most influential figure in human history, Jesus Christ, was only a fraction of the truth. Imagine that buried beneath centuries of doctrine and dogma, there exists an ancient manuscript, older than some parts of the canonical Bible, which tells a very different story. A story so powerful, so disruptive, that entire religious structures might tremble under its weight. Now picture that this ancient manuscript was found not in a remote desert or sealed monastery, but in Turkey, hidden, preserved, and now revealed. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not fiction. This is a historical enigma wrapped in mystery. And today, we're going to explore what this ancient Bible might mean for our understanding of Jesus Christ, of spirituality itself, and of the very fabric of reality. And what you'll discover by the end of this video is something few dare to speak aloud, because the final revelation is the most powerful of all. Before we dive deeper, if this kind of content resonates with the seeker within you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment below with your thoughts and questions. Share this video with those who are also searching for deeper truth. What we're about to explore might shift the way you perceive the divine forever. Let's begin with what we know. In 2000, Turkish authorities intercepted a group of smugglers attempting to sell an ancient manuscript on the black market. This wasn't just any manuscript. It was bound in worn leather, inscribed in ancient Syriac, and dated to over 1500 years ago. It became known as the Gospel of Barnabas, but what's inside it shocked even the most seasoned scholars. The text speaks of Jesus not as the Son of God, but as a prophet, a powerful teacher and messenger, yes, but not divine in the way Christianity has come to proclaim. It declares that Jesus did not die on the cross. Instead, someone else, possibly Judas Iscariot, was crucified in his place, and Jesus was taken up to heaven alive. For many, this may sound eerily familiar, because these are precisely the teachings found in the Quran, which appeared several centuries later. And yet, here we have a manuscript predating the earliest known versions of the Bible in several forms, echoing ideas considered heretical by the mainstream church. How could such a gospel exist, hidden away for centuries, aligning so closely with teachings long dismissed as unorthodox? And who exactly was Barnabas? He was a companion of the Apostle Paul, mentioned multiple times in the Acts of the Apostles. But while Paul went on to shape the theological core of early Christianity, emphasizing Jesus as the divine Son of God, it's said that Barnabas disagreed. Some traditions suggest he rejected Paul's version of the gospel, choosing instead to preserve the true words of Jesus. Could it be that Barnabas wrote his own account, an account that was later suppressed, destroyed, or hidden by early church leaders? This ancient Bible, now housed in the Ethnography Museum of Ankara, has inscriptions in gold lettering and carries unmistakable energy. Scholars and theologians who've seen it describe a sense of reverence and awe, even if its contents challenge everything they've taught. What secret could be so threatening that entire religious institutions would want it buried? We must remember that the process of selecting the books of the Bible was not purely divine, it was political too. The Council of Nicaea in the 4th century, under Emperor Constantine, played a pivotal role in shaping what became the New Testament. Many texts were excluded, some deemed apocryphal, others heretical. But what if those excluded texts held the real teachings of Jesus, untainted by empire, untouched by agenda? Let me ask you, if a truth has been hidden for centuries, suppressed by power, and buried beneath fear, does that make it any less true? Throughout history, religious institutions have held great influence over knowledge, not always with pure intent. The Gnostic Gospels, for example, discovered in Nag Hammadi in 1945, offered radically different insights into Jesus' teachings, speaking of inner enlightenment, divine union, and a hidden knowledge that transcends organized religion. Much like the Gospel of Barnabas, they were cast out, branded heretical, and lost to the sands of time, until fate decided otherwise. Why does this matter? Because if Jesus did not die on the cross, as this manuscript suggests, then the foundation of Christianity, built on resurrection and redemption through sacrifice, must be reconsidered, and not in a way that diminishes Jesus, but perhaps one that elevates him. Could it be that his mission was not to die for humanity's sins, but to awaken humanity to its own divine nature? What would change in your life if you truly believe that the divine spark isn't something external to worship, but something internal to awaken. This question strikes at the heart of all esoteric traditions, from Hermeticism to Kabbalah, from Sufism to early Gnosticism. They all point toward a sacred truth long hidden from plain sight, that the kingdom of heaven is within. That Jesus did not come to start a religion, but to reveal a path, a way of being, of seeing, of awakening. Could this ancient Bible then be part of a greater puzzle, a missing piece in a long-forgotten spiritual map meant for those who seek beyond dogma? Stay with me, because what we're uncovering is only the beginning. In the next part, we'll dive even deeper into what the Gospel of Barnabas actually says, its visions of truth, its warnings for humanity, and its potential to transform how we understand not only Jesus, but ourselves. And remember, the final revelation at the end of this journey will challenge everything you thought you knew, and it might just be the key to unlocking your own inner light. As we venture further into the pages of this ancient manuscript, the words of the Gospel of Barnabas unfold like a key unlocking doors long sealed shut. What we find is not just a reinterpretation of known stories, but an entirely different spiritual framework, one that invites the reader to question the very foundation of religious dogma and embrace a more mystical, inward journey toward truth. According to this gospel, Jesus explicitly foretells the coming of the prophet Muhammad by name, centuries before his birth. This detail has stunned scholars and enraged others, as it raises profound theological questions. How could a Christian text reference a prophet central to Islam? Some dismiss it outright as forgery. Others, however, recognize that such a claim, if authentic, could point to a shared spiritual lineage between the Abrahamic faiths, one obscured by centuries of division and rivalry. But more important than prophecy is the central theme running through this gospel, that salvation does not come from sacrifice, but from alignment with divine truth. In it, Jesus teaches about the illusion of the material world, the deception of worldly power, and the urgency of spiritual awakening. He speaks of the soul as eternal, bound not by sin but by ignorance. The way to liberation, according to this gospel, is not through rituals or fear, but through the direct experience of the divine within. This idea is echoed in the wisdom of the mystics across time. Meister Eckhart, a 13th century Christian mystic, once said, "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me." The Gospel of Barnabas seems to affirm this non-dual vision, that the divine is not a distant being, but an indwelling presence, closer to us than our own breath. As we read deeper, we find passages where Jesus rebukes the priests and Pharisees, not only for hypocrisy, but for turning spiritual truth into religious control. He warns that future generations will be led astray by those who claim to speak in his name, but do not follow his path. In this version, Jesus speaks with urgency and compassion, urging his followers to seek wisdom through contemplation and purity of heart, not blind obedience. What's terrifying about this message is not that it contradicts orthodoxy, it's that it exposes how deeply humanity has strayed from the original teachings. If Jesus was, as this text claims, a prophet among prophets, then the elevation of his story into divine mythology may have distorted the very message he came to deliver. It's not about reducing Jesus, but restoring him to his role as a guide, a revealer of truth, a mirror in which we can see the divine potential within ourselves. One might ask, why would such a gospel be hidden? Why would it not be included in the canon? To answer that, we must look at history with clear eyes. By the 4th century, Christianity had transformed from a persecuted spiritual movement into a state religion. Under Emperor Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, theological unity became essential, not to preserve truth, but to consolidate imperial power. Any gospel that contradicted the rising narrative of divine sacrifice and resurrection was dangerous. The Gospel of Barnabas, with its radical reinterpretation of Jesus, would have been seen as a threat to that emerging order. This isn't just speculation. In his book Misquoting Jesus, New Testament scholar Bart D. Ehrman reveals how early scribes altered texts, removed passages, and reshaped doctrines to fit an evolving orthodoxy. And in Lost Christianities, he documents entire communities of early Christians who followed alternative gospels, now forgotten or deliberately destroyed. We must ask ourselves, What have we lost in this historical pruning of spiritual truth? The Gospel of Barnabas challenges the duality of heaven and hell as reward and punishment systems. Instead, it speaks of the soul's journey as a return to divine unity through knowledge, compassion, and surrender. This aligns strikingly with the teachings of the Hermetic tradition, which speaks of the soul as a spark of the divine, seeking to remember its origin. The Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, reflects the very essence of this ancient gospel, emphasizing that the divine order is mirrored within the human being. The sacred is not somewhere out there, waiting to judge us. It is within, waiting to be awakened. Consider this. What if the most terrifying secret revealed by this manuscript is not that Jesus didn't die on the cross, but that humanity has built an entire civilization on a misinterpretation of his purpose? And yet with this fear comes an invitation to return, not to religious literalism, but to spiritual essence, not to blind belief, but to inner awakening. The message is not to discard Jesus, but to rediscover him, not as an unreachable figure placed on a pedestal, but as a living teacher whose words still echo for those who listen with the soul. Could it be that the real power of Jesus' message lies not in his death, but in his life, in the wisdom he embodied, the compassion he lived, the truth he dared to speak? Let's reflect for a moment. If Jesus came not to start a religion, but to awaken the divine within, then what would that mean for your life? How would you live differently if you believed that you too carry the seed of the sacred, that your suffering, your questions, your longing for something greater are not signs of weakness but the very doorway to enlightenment? This is the call of the Gospel of Barnabas, and this is why it may have been buried, hidden, silenced, because it puts the power back into your hands, not the power to rule others, but the power to awaken to your true nature. In the next part of our journey, we will examine more of the specific teachings contained within this gospel. We will look at how they challenge modern Christianity and how they resonate with spiritual traditions from ancient Egypt, Persia, and even India. And we will explore the implications of these teachings for our world today. But most of all, we will come closer to the final, most powerful revelation, one that connects ancient wisdom with the deepest truths of your own soul. Let us now turn our gaze toward the teachings themselves, those preserved within this ancient manuscript, and those echoed across distant cultures and forgotten lineages. What is it about these hidden words that so deeply threatens the established narrative? What truths lie dormant, waiting to be reawakened in the hearts of those who dare to look beyond the veil? One of the most startling elements within the Gospel of Barnabas is its radical redefinition of divinity. In stark contrast to the canonical Gospels, where Jesus is presented as the incarnate Son of God, the Barnabas text presents him as a humble servant of the Creator, radiant in wisdom, but adamant in his denial of divinity. Again and again, he is portrayed as a prophet, not a god, and warns his followers against worshipping him. This echoes with striking similarity the teachings of Eastern sages who urged their disciples not to worship them, but to realize the divine within. The Buddha himself, nearing his death, told his followers, "Be a lamp unto yourselves." The Gospel of Barnabas likewise speaks not of salvation through faith in a Savior, but through purification of heart, the pursuit of truth, and the surrender to the one eternal God. We see in this a return to an ancient spiritual principle, that the divine is not monopolized by institutions or intermediaries. That truth is not a doctrine, but a direct experience. That God, or the source or the infinite, is beyond name, form, or creed. According to the text, Jesus predicts that after him will come a time of great deception, that his words will be twisted, his image idolized, and his message commercialized. He warns that humanity will create idols in his name, building temples of stone while neglecting the temple of the heart. And in this warning, we feel the weight of our own time, a world filled with churches, yet plagued by spiritual emptiness. He says, "Many shall come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and shall deceive many." Not only those who falsely claim to be messiahs, but those who use his name to control, dominate, and divide. And perhaps this is the most unsettling truth of all, that what is called Christianity today may be very different from what Jesus actually lived and taught. Think about that. If Jesus were to walk the earth today, would he recognize the religion that bears his name? Would he walk into a cathedral and feel at home? Or would he go to the poor, the outcast, the seekers of truth, and whisper to them the same words he spoke centuries ago, that the kingdom of God is not found in buildings or rituals, but within? Now let us look beyond the text and into the symbolic patterns that run across ancient wisdom traditions. In the Hermetic writings, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, we find teachings about the illusion of the material world, the immortality of the soul, and the path of return to the divine source. These writings, predating much of Western theology, speak of a spiritual rebirth that mirrors what Jesus says in both canonical and hidden Gospels. Unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. This rebirth is not a physical event, but a transformation of consciousness. The soul, lost in illusion, begins to awaken to its divine origin. The veil is lifted, the ego dissolves, and what remains is a being illuminated from within. The Gospel of Barnabas teaches this path in a way that mirrors the mystical traditions of the East. There is an emphasis on self-awareness, asceticism, and purification. Jesus speaks of silence, solitude, and contemplation, not unlike the yogis of India or the desert fathers of early Christianity. He urges his followers to renounce greed, pride, and violence, and to live in harmony with all creation. Could it be that the Jesus presented in this gospel was not a figure of worship, but a spiritual master in the highest sense, a mirror of the awakened human calling others to do the same? And yet this interpretation was too dangerous for a growing empire that needed doctrine, obedience, and uniformity. The Jesus of the Gospel of Barnabas could not be used to justify war, conquest, or control. He could not be commodified, politicized, or worshipped from afar. He had to be erased. It is here that we find the terrifying secret, not because it is evil, but because it is liberating. The secret is not about betrayal or substitution. The secret is that humanity does not need a mediator to reach the divine, that the spark of God lives in you, that the very same light that shone through Jesus shines within your own being, waiting to be awakened. But that kind of power is dangerous to those who profit from control, and so it was hidden, disguised, and demonized. The Gnostics called it gnosis, the Hermetics called it the one mind, the Sufis called it divine union, and Jesus, as portrayed in this ancient gospel, simply called it truth. Let us now pause to reflect. What if the story of Jesus was not meant to end in death and resurrection, but to begin in awakening? What if the cross is not a symbol of sacrifice, but of transformation, the dying of illusion and the rising of truth? What if the second coming is not a future event, but an inner realization happening now in every soul that chooses to awaken? In our modern world, where people are more disconnected than ever, this message is not only relevant, it is urgent. The Gospel of Barnabas invites us not to tear down what others believe, but to return to the essence behind belief, to seek the eternal truth behind the temporal form, and to listen, not only to scriptures, but to the still voice within. In the final part of our journey, we will confront the ultimate revelation hidden within this text, the one that speaks not only of Jesus, but of humanity's divine purpose. It is a message so powerful, so transformative, that it may forever change the way you see yourself, your faith, and your place in the universe. Stay with me. The final key is near. Now, we arrive at the heart of the mystery, the revelation so profound and so unsettling that it was buried, hidden from the eyes of the masses, protected by time and silence. But today, it calls to be heard once again. The Gospel of Barnabas, preserved in the shadows of history, does not merely seek to redefine who Jesus was. Its true power lies in what it reveals about you. As we've seen, this ancient manuscript presents Jesus not as a divine sacrifice, but as a prophet, a bringer of truth, a mirror of the awakened human being. And while this alone has shaken the foundations of theological doctrine, it is not the final secret. The terrifying and liberating truth is this: the divine is not something to be found outside of you. It has always been within you. Jesus, in this gospel, is not a distant savior to be worshipped, but a guide pointing inward, showing you that the same divine essence that lived through him also lives through you. He came not to be exalted, but to awaken the slumbering divinity hidden within every soul. This is the message the institutions could not allow to flourish, because a person who understands that God is not in temples of stone, but in their own heart, cannot be controlled. They cannot be manipulated by fear, nor led by guilt. they become free, and in their freedom, they begin to shine. That is the secret, and that is the danger. This revelation is not new. It echoes through the ages, whispered by mystics and sages who risked everything to speak it. The Gnostics called it the divine spark. The Vedantic seers of India called it Atman, the eternal self, one with Brahman. The ancient Egyptian priests spoke of Ka, the vital essence that connects the human and the divine. And in the Gospel of Barnabas, Jesus is shown to affirm this same truth again and again. The kingdom of heaven is within you, not in churches, not in rituals, not even in texts, but within the silent sanctuary of your own soul. What does this mean for your life? It means that you are not broken, you are not fallen, you are not separated from God. You have forgotten, but you can remember. And in remembering, you awaken to your true identity, not as a sinner in need of saving, but as a divine being in the process of becoming. It also means that salvation is not an external transaction, but an inner transformation. That you were never meant to bow before a figure of worship, but to rise into the fullness of your own spiritual inheritance. This changes everything. And yet it is terrifying for those who have built their power on control, because the awakened individual becomes sovereign, not in arrogance, but in sacred responsibility. They become light in a world shrouded in illusion, and light cannot be controlled. This is why the Gospel of Barnabas had to be buried. This is why those who walked the mystical path were branded heretics, witches, rebels, because they carried the fire of remembrance. The flame that threatens to burn away centuries of distortion. And now this flame has come to you. But this is not just a call to knowledge, it is a call to action. Ask yourself, if you are divine in essence, if the soul within you is eternal, what are you doing with this sacred gift of life? Are you still waiting for someone else to save you? Or are you ready to walk the path of awakening? Are you still seeking truth in the words of others? Or are you ready to become the seeker who listens to the voice within? The most powerful truth is not found in ancient books. It is found in the quiet stillness of your own awareness. This is where Jesus taught from. This is where all true masters point. And this is where your journey begins. The ancient Bible found in Turkey, the Gospel of Barnabas, is not just a manuscript. It is a mirror. And what it reflects is the forgotten truth of who you are. And perhaps that is the real secret, the terrifying secret, that Jesus Christ did not come to start a religion. He came to awaken gods, not in heaven, but here, now, in you. So what will you do with this truth? Will you ignore it, as many do, unwilling to let go of comfortable illusions? Or will you allow it to burn away what is false so that what is true can rise? The choice has always been yours. And now, you cannot unhear what has been revealed. If this message has stirred something in you, if it has opened your eyes or touched your heart, I invite you to share this video with others who are seeking. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, your questions, your awakening. This is how the truth spreads, not through force, but through resonance. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, because this is just the beginning. We are standing on the edge of a new spiritual dawn, and those who remember, who choose to awaken, are being called not to follow, but to rise. You are not alone. You were never alone. You are divine, and the light is within you. Always. Thanks for looking.